Hey everyone, welcome to today's live stream, and where we're going to talk about the growth mindset, a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, what it means to you, because it can be a very personal issue, although there's often a lot of science behind it, and we'll get into that, and what it means to you, how you build it yourself, how you can help to at least attempt to build it in other people, and then also how you hire for it. So Ken, I'm going to start with you. You're a West Point undergrad, you're a Harvard MBA, you work for the city, for the mayor of Boston, and you're also a former Special Forces combat officer. So when you think about a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset,
Mhm.
what does it mean for you? How have you built it for yourself? How have you built it into your soldiers? How have you built it into your teams that you've led outside of the military? Just react to that.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind to me, Brian, is just like the idea of being a continual learner, always wanting to improve. Look, never being like set in your ways or think you know what's best always. So I think that's the way I kind of interpreted it from reading the book, and the continual learner element of it, and that's how I thought of it. As far as like trying to, and for me personally, how that's been valuable to me is after transitioning from the military into kind of the civilian world, if you will, and into the next phase of my career. I mean, I chose to take time off, take 2 years out of my professional career from a work standpoint and invest that time and invest it into my future and education by going and getting an MBA, because I thought like the return on investment, the ROI there would be valuable. And honestly, for me to catch up to my peer group in the business world, if you will, I thought I needed to take 2 years, or I thought it would be nice 2 years of relaxing after a couple of deployments and 6 years in the Army, to invest time and learn something new at business school. And in order to catch up to my peers in that capacity, who've been working for those 6, 7, 8 years in industry, I had this great experience from the military, leadership experience much earlier on than most people get in their career. I spent over 3 years directly leading, teams of 25 to 45. So that's what I did is I took those 2 years kind of a pause in my career, but also to continue pushing my education and learning forward, to just understand like the business jargon, understand different elements of it, and look at leadership from a different perspective as well too. So that's what I did. As far as like putting it into kind of into my soldiers and my team as well here at Enter Growth is like, first thing is recommending different books to read, challenging people, but also giving them more priorities, more opportunities to excel that are maybe above their pay grade, if you will, or just above their job title,
Right.
and pushing them into areas of the business that maybe that's not in their job title or in their normal day to day, but giving them those opportunities to flourish in different capacities as well too. So that's how I've thought about it. And then also from a hiring perspective, I think that can be challenging, because oftentimes you don't always get as much time with candidates as you want. But I think, targeted questions, kind of an easy question that someone asked me recently in an interview process, like, or not recently, but a couple years ago, was like, what's the most recent book you read? And like, honestly, the title of the book doesn't really matter. If you say the answer is, oh, I don't really read, or I haven't read a book in a number of years, like that's probably the wrong answer. So,
Right.
but also just like, I think you can also test it too by like understanding, okay, like, well, some of the questions that we asked very, very early on in the interview process here is just, especially with senior executives, is like, what are the size of the teams you've led? What was your P&L management or budget responsibility over a certain amount of time? And then who did you report up to? And then that can lead into a very interesting conversation down the road, as far as like, okay, now talk to me about like, okay, how many directors did you have? How many managers under the directors? And what did the team overall look like? And then you can get into kind of their professional development and planning as well with their own teams. And I think, if they're doing that for their people, it's not a safe assumption, but you can also think, okay, what are they doing to improve themselves too? If they're investing that much time into their own people, I bet you they're learning simultaneously as well too. Because I think you can always learn from other, like, just because someone works for you or is, has a different title, that, you may be a VP and some directors, that's not to say that they don't have some very valuable information that can like help you.
We're gonna come back to this issue of self-improvement and the average college-educated adult reads how many books a year, do you think? The average college-educated adult reads how many books per year?
Average, probably 3 to 4.
Vera, Kevin?
I was going to say 5.
Vera? I think you may be on mute. You're on mute, Vera.
Oh, sorry.
You're good now.
You're
I'm
good
not
now.
actually. Okay, sorry. I said 10. I'm a little bit more optimistic.
Ooh.
Well, that's because you speak 4 languages and you lived all over the world and you're smarter than the average bear. It's less than 2. So we'll get back to self-learning and the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. It's really fascinating. And for many of you who are watching, we used Carol Dweck's book, The Fixed Mindset, which has been read by well over 1 million people all over the world. I try to give that book, I pass that book out like candy. I have a copy on me at any given time, and I reread it all of the time, including last night and this morning. So over to you, Vera. So you speak a lot of languages. You've lived and worked all over the world. Is that just a part of where you're from and people live that way? Or has how has the growth mindset impacted you, including how you learn all these different languages and different businesses you've been a part of? How has it impacted you? And then how do you look for that in people on your teams and teams you've helped to build?
Right, thank you. I would say that, first, I think that the book itself, Growth Mindset, it in a way it helped me to define what growth mindset is. Because obviously you learn through life, you start, from your childhood through the college, university, changing countries, changing job, and at some point of time you start to analyze let's say your learning experience and your attitude towards learning and your attitude towards yourself, because essentially growth mindset is all about learning, but also about the fact that as a person you accept the fact that you can actually learn, you can improve, you can grow. As myself, it's interesting because I was actually born in, let's say, in an environment which was tricky in this respect, because I was born right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, with many values, and especially when you got teaching and education, with many values which were still very, I won't say squared, but very strict in a way that you're not supposed to think, you're not supposed to reflect, but you have to memorize and repeat what the teacher, what the mentor is saying. But at the same time, the country was in transition into something completely, I would say, new, very disorganized, and we always had two sides of the coin, no? The side of the old and the side of the new. And obviously, as a child of 4 or 5 years old, you don't really realize it because you just follow the crowd and learn. And I think that the seeds of this growth mindset, they were essentially planted by my family. But until I think 17, 18 years old, until when I actually went to study, went to Spain, I didn't know that things could be managed in a different way. So I remember my first week at the university. We had a very dynamic discussion around, I think it was marketing, or let's say some kind of a business science. And I remember that many people in class, many students, they were just actively discussing and giving their opinion and arguing. And all the Russian students, we were just sitting and listening. And when the teacher was asking a question, we were answering the question, giving the answer, but there was not this natural habit of actually arguing and just expressing your opinion. So for me, it was, I wouldn't say it was a cultural shock, because obviously it's something which is more convenient for you to live and adapt to new context. But I think this transition made me realize that things are different. They're different in different parts of the world. And if you want to succeed here, you need to realize how things are organized here, and just try to capture, try to get, I would say, all the positive experiences from different countries. Then later, I would say that, yes, I've been extremely lucky to work across different industries in executive search, in investment advisory, in private equity, and also changed different countries because I was working at some point of time on the project basis where actually each 7 months I had to change a country and changed like in a very drastic way because I was in Spain, then I was sent to Central America, then to South America, then to Central Asia. So with this, I think experience, obviously you're completely outside your comfort zone, but you realize that each new experience, if you want to succeed, you have to make maybe a triple effort.
Right.
Triple effort because it's a different context, it's a different challenge, and again, like, it's not to reassure yourself, it's not to really feel how great I am. No, but it's just part of the journey. And again, for me, it's not to say that I've been there, speak so many languages, but I feel extremely lucky that I've lived it. And I think that with the time, you realize how valuable this experience is, and it essentially starts guiding you towards what is growth mindset, especially if you grow to a level where you have teams and you have people that you actually are supposed to coach and train.
But it's an interesting thing that you're bringing up. So you grew up in the former Soviet Union. I mean, you were at least born there. And this notion of a growth mindset, whether it's how much of it is nature versus nurture, how much of it is environmental. And I'll give you an example. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My dad was an enlisted sergeant in the military, and my brother went to West Point. And then my brother went on to, he was an honor graduate at West Point, was an honor graduate at law school after that. And he was my first exposure to what I would consider the elite world. What's interesting, and my brother and I've had this conversation, he would not be insulted if I said that publicly. My brother has very much a fixed mindset. His IQ is off the chain. When he was in law school, I was his roommate at the time. I was a sales rep, and I remember saying, Dennis, all the other first-year law school students are freaking out. You're not even reading your books. And he said, little brother, I go to class. That's enough. And he graduated with honors. Now, having said that, I always used to think if I had my brother's talent, I would be running the United States and Canada as one unified country, and everyone would be happy with it. But I don't. So what I found really interesting in Carol Dweck's book, oftentimes those who have the most elite brains, if it didn't come easy to them, then it wasn't worth doing. And then in my business career, where I've literally hired thousands and thousands of people, and I've always over-rotated on interviewing them myself and be a part of the process. And often find times when I'm interviewing people and even in leading teams, I would find people with so much talent, and I watch them just, and that's so many people, I just watch them just sit on it. And I now, because of Carol Dweck's research, I think, well, it's the growth versus fixed mindset. And just react to this. Kevin, your thoughts on the growth mindset, whether it's nature versus nurture. If you have a fixed mindset, in your experience, because you've been in search for over a decade, can you change? Can you change someone's mindset as a leader? Or when you're looking for someone, can you change their mindset from a fixed to growth mindset? And is that even your business to do so?
Sure. So it's funny you mention your brother, because I have a similar relationship. My brother is a CFO in the jet engine business at General Electric, and he's incredibly bright. 1,600 on his SATs. He does not at all have a growth mindset, has a fixed mindset, but it works very well in his job function. And so I think, I, on the other hand, we have equal levels of success, but doing very different things. He's been in GE for his entire career. I've been in a few different firms, and I specifically chose places where I thought there was an opportunity to be creative and to build and grow. My brother, he's a good guitarist, but he plays music created by other musicians, right? I play the drums and the guitar. I make it up as I go. And so I think there are, innate competencies and, personality characteristics that may channel you into a specific job where you then don't have to change, and you can do one thing really well, and you can do it over and over successfully. But so I do think people find themselves in a job where they can be successful with a fixed mindset. On the flip side, you find people who land in jobs that require a lot of creative problem solving and a growth mindset. And in those jobs, if they fall into a fixed mindset pattern of behavior, they will probably find themselves failing in that position. So that's the first thought. But I do think that people can be coached, right? And this firm has a great history and legacy in coaching executives to transform into maybe what they consider to be better versions of themselves. And so I think people can be coached, but I do also think it's usually you're building on an existing skill set, and you want people to break out of their comfort zone, but not necessarily try to be something they're not, right? Especially when they're at a senior level and they know what they're good at. But then, as it relates to talent acquisition and thinking about talent, and who has a growth mindset and who has a fixed mindset, you do need to think about it in the context of a specific project or role. But at the same time, you also need to know how to go look for the growth mindset, right? So how do you look at a CFO or a CTO or a VP of engineering and look for a growth mindset? You might not think of a VP of engineering as a growth mindset, somebody with a growth mindset, right? You might think of marketing and sales that way. However, if you double click, you go look and you find, oh, this person built a team from 50 to 200 engineers. That's growth, right? Or they built a net new product, and it turns out they dreamed up, this was their own idea. They rallied the troops on the product management team, and then ended up taking a new product to market that in 2 years created $20 million in new revenue on top of the existing set of products, right? So you have to know how to look for it in people, because even in functions where you don't think you're going to find it, you can actually find it.
Right. It's along this line. What I found interesting in Carol's book is this notion that often the smartest person in the room, or who aspires to be or thinks of themselves as the smartest person in the room, often suffers from this affliction of a lack of a growth mindset. How do you navigate? We've all seen that. We've all seen an aspiring leader, a current leader who has this need, this drive to be the smartest person in the room. How do you just react to that notion? And then how do you, when you see that, especially if someone is higher up on the chain than you are, and you're trying to solve a problem, how have you navigated through that when you have someone with a fixed mindset who has the platform, who's trying to be the smartest person in the room, and in fact may be the smartest person in the room?
Yeah.
You need to get things done. Anyone who wants to hear, how have you navigated through that?
Well, I have one just quick thought, and then I can pass it off to the rest of the group. But I think that it's really about asking questions, right? And you can ask them of yourself, or you can, if it's somebody you report to and you want to get them to think differently, you can ask the question. But I think it all starts with, what do you do really well? What do you do moderately well? And what do you not do all that well? And in this, put the first question aside. We know the answer, right? If you think you do everything really well, even if you're wildly successful, there might be a character flaw in there, right? So if you can think about, okay, I've done this moderately well, and then double click on those items and think, okay, well, how could I do it differently? That then creates, new ideas, new thinking, and can take you down the path of growth. Right. And the same applies to when you answer the question, what I don't do well. And a lot of times when you because I have used that as an interview question over the years. And it's amazing when you ask people who are, maybe have a healthy ego and they are, wildly successful CEOs, whoever the case might be, they will often say, wow, nobody's asked me that before, or a recruiter hasn't asked me that before. And they often enjoy answering the question. And so you can lead people into creative thinking and problem solving by just asking some simple self-reflective questions.
Ken and Vera, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Vera, go, please.
Sorry, I'll be fast. I think there's one very, at least in my experience, one very powerful question that you ask to candidates when it comes to their achievements is how. How have you achieved this? Because obviously we do value a lot when you see on the CV sales increase by 30%, executives that build great teams that lead them through crisis, that manage transformation. But what is interesting to know is how have you done it? Because obviously they all operate in different circumstances. They all face different challenges. And sometimes if you know how to answer this how in the right way, you can even position yourself as a very strong candidate when you manage, you tell how you have managed some not so successful situations, some failures. So I think this is something that truly helps to identify this attitude and the mindset.
Hey Ken, I'm gonna pass to you, but I just have to comment because I listening to you say that I became excited because I have been saying for years that the way to tell the difference between an A and a B is a B can say what they've done, and A can say how they've done it. And I have won projects by telling prospective clients that this is how I interview. So anyway, that just really, really resonates with me. Sorry, Ken.
Yeah, and thanks, Kevin. I think, Brian, the way I perceive this question too of a leader in thinking they're the smartest person in the room, or if they are, and how do you solve problems and things like that, is I think two things that come to mind for me, and we've kind of talked about this in the past in our earlier conversations too, Brian, is who do you surround yourself with? Who do you hire on your team? Are you hiring people to fill your gaps and your lack of knowledge in your areas of non-expertise? Or are you just filling your team up with people that are going to promote you, put you on a pedestal and the like too, right? I think you've talked to me as a multi-time CEO, you've talked all the time about I need to hire the best people in areas where I don't have proficiency or I don't have expertise to help move the company and grow the company and move us in the direction that you see fit from a strategic standpoint. So I think who are you putting in, who are the individuals that you're putting in those seats at your table when things get really, really difficult? And then in addition, once you have the right people in those seats to then help you solve those difficult problems and complement you in the things that you can bring to the table and leverage their expertise. But then what's the environment that you're creating? Are you creating an open and candid environment where those team members that you specifically spent time and money and energy going out and bringing into your organization, making sure that their values align with yours, that they align with the company values and everyone knows the direction they're going in? Are they in an environment where they can stand up and say, hey, Brian, CEO, no, I disagree? Or are they just going to be, yes, sir, no, ma'am? Are they just going to be, saying what you want to hear? And in reality, you're paying for them just to be sitting around your big conference table to look good and boost up your ego. So that's how I kind of think about it initially.
You know what I love to do? I love to hire people, and I'm borrowing this from one of my favorite leaders, and her name is Bethany Frankel. And I'll dive into that in a second, but I love to find out if people are coming from a place of yes, because the best leaders come from a place of yes, in my experience. Doesn't mean you're going to say yes, but in the end, you have to come from a place of yes. So is anyone familiar with Bethany Frankel? Well, are you familiar with the Housewives of New York, New Jersey, Orange County? Are you familiar with those Housewives shows?
Yes.
Well, I'm not saying that someone watches them on a regular basis.
I can't say I've watched.
I'm not saying that I do that or that I watch Bachelor or any of those shows, but I'm just saying. So about 15 years ago, I was watching the Housewives of New York. And Bethany Frankel was one of the characters on that. And Bethany, I don't know how she was a housewife because she wasn't married, didn't have kids, but fine. But she was this aspiring caterer at this time. And at that point, she wasn't famous and now super wealthy for a specific reason. So I remember this episode, and it was sort of like this idea of coming from a place of yes. They were preparing for a big charity. And one of the housewives, one of the wealthy housewives said, I know Madonna. And Bethany said, could you get Madonna to just walk through here? And the other woman said, Madonna's not going to do that. And Bethany said, we understand each other. I come from a place of yes, and you come from a place of no. Now, the power of Bethany Frankel is this. Have you ever heard of Skinny Girl Margarita?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bethany, because she comes from a place of yes, and it's always, she's a pure entrepreneur. So she thought of this idea of the Skinny Girl Margarita, and then she would go to, she invented it. Then she would go sit alone and try to shill it at grocery stores, and they would follow her alone at times and this and that. So cut to many years later, I believe that Seagram's bought it from her for something in the magnitude of $300 million, plus a lifelong royalty, something like that. So I never forgot that. So when I start thinking about the teams that I built, I like to think that I already did that, but Bethany helped to crystallize the growth mindset for me. Look for people who come from a place of yes, because that's how you get creativity. That's how you get innovation. That's how you get teamwork. That's how you build trust. Doesn't mean you're going to say no, say yes, but you may indeed say no. But I often find that people with a fixed mindset, often this perceived and may actually very well be the smartest person in the room, are always looking, or in many cases, are looking for reasons to say no to something because they know better. They've seen the future. So people like Bethany Frankel just come from a place of yes. So on this issue of testing, which no one brought up, but I just did. So everyone here in most places around the world have taken some form of a college entrance exam. In the United States, at the ACT or the SAT. In other places around the world, I think in Australia, it's like the HEX exam or something like that. But most have some form of college entrance exam. And so there's this notion, when you think about the growth mindset and the fixed mindset, I'm going to ask you, do you think when it comes to growth mindset, do you think having a label around an ACT or an SAT score or whatever they take in France and other places, do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea when it comes to the growth mindset or the fixed and the impact that it might have on the world? Just whoever would like to take it first. Ken, what do you think? You went to that place, it means you had a very strong ACT. So just to to that notion of just testing in general and the impact on what that may have on a human being and potentially the growth trajectory through their life.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of the standardized testing. I think, oftentimes, especially for those high school or like college entrance exams, oftentimes that can, be more of an indicator of wealth and privilege versus poverty and life situation versus intelligence. However, so that in that respect, I'm not a big fan of it because I don't think that it's a even playing field necessarily. For grad schools, I think maybe there's a little different perspective on it. I think grad schools, especially if people are coming out of career, taking time off, like in business school or law school and those different things, I think oftentimes those can be, it's just another data point. I don't think it has to be the primary data point. I think if you've spent time in industry and then you're going back to school, I think I'd be more interested in, what have you done lately? Like, what have you done in your career versus, but I understand this element of it in that respect for grad school, because it's another data point, as long as it's not the primary data point. But for college entrance exams, for high school students going forward, I'm not a big fan of, but that's my perspective. Any
from you, Vera or Kevin?
I do think I tend to agree, and I think it's it tightens the filters in some of the wrong places, right? And you could end up removing incredibly high quality individuals from your institution because you tightened filters in some of the wrong areas. That's it. That's like how I would kind of summarize my thinking on it.
There's a comment that just came through, and someone said, I look for people with an ambitious mindset. So I'm thinking through an interesting interview question is that I would just like to see how you would react to it. Is there a difference between an ambitious mindset, a growth mindset, and a fixed mindset? And that might be a question I'll ask candidates going forward just to hear what they have to say. But what do you guys think? Is there a big difference between an ambitious mindset and a growth mindset and a fixed mindset? Just react to that.
I think ambitious maybe sits somewhere in the middle, because ambitious, you might suggest you're trying to get to ambitious alone is not a growth mindset, right? Because you can have a fixed mindset, but you're trying to solve a very specific set of problems and then get to a specific point. But on the flip side, ambitious does suggest that you maybe are trying to do something better than other people do it. Or do something better than you have done it in the past. So an ambitious mindset maybe opens the dialogue for whether this person has a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, which is maybe very much about somebody having tunnel vision on doing something a certain way.
Good. Your thoughts on that, Vera? Ken?
I agree. I mean, I agree with Kevin regarding the position of ambition in the middle, because essentially ambition is pretty much a lot about yourself. It's a lot about your ego. And it's obviously a very good quality, but I think that it really depends on the context and how it correlates with other qualities you have, like listening, compassion. So all alone, I don't think it has as much value as the growth mindset. And the growth mindset, it's a lot about really projecting this belief that people can learn and grow and evolve, not only on yourself, but also on those that you have around you, and especially on your team. Because again, it's a lot about teamwork, and which eventually evolves as an organizational growth mindset. Because again, growth mindset, if you're all alone, I don't know if it really can be that successful.
And what do you guys think about grit and the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset? One of the things that my wife and I talk about, we have 4 kids. She didn't grow up with much. I didn't grow up with much, although we had parents who fed us and loved us, which is a lot of people don't have that. But I grew up poor. And I often say to other parents and people I work with, I often feel sorry. It seems crazy, but I also often say I feel sorry for people who didn't grow up poor. Now, it doesn't mean that people who grew up with affluence don't have their own view of how you, and the reason I say that is the grit, the things that you have to go through, the stories that are a part of it. For example, I joined the Army at 17. I was in an infantry ranger battalion, but I was a clerk typist. I didn't do drugs. Some people smoke pot. I remember sleeping under my bunk with a bayonet because people in the barracks thought I was an undercover police officer. So my point is, those kinds of stories and how you navigate through them perhaps are more prevalent, could be wrong, for those who grew up with less. And then the grit and how you deal with those kinds of things and how you build them through the rest of your life. How do you think about that in terms of those who have an elite background or who come from affluence, and a correlation between that and a growth mindset or lack thereof? Just react to that. Anyone?
And Brian, it's funny you bring it up. I don't know if you can see it, but I actually had grit on my notes here to turn the tables and ask you about grit. So you beat me to it, because I was going to ask you how you thought of it in respect to a fixed or growth mindset too. So I was kind of thinking along the same lines. I think, when I think about it, I guess I would have to say grit would align more with a growth mindset, specifically in respect. I completely understand what you're saying, folks with maybe, not as well-to-do a background or not as affluent background, like may not have many options, but to like learn and exhibit that grit to better their situation on their own. And, there's probably some, independence that can come along with that, and those learning and trials and tribulations and moving forward in that respect. I also think people that come from, more, whatever it might be, a more middle class or upper middle class background, can still exhibit grit and as well too, it's just the positions and the challenges that they place themselves in early on. I think, people can learn that grit through academics, through athletics as well too. I think they're, early in life, I think, team sports and team environments and those types of situations are very valuable. as well too. So I align the grit element more with the growth mindset than I do the fixed mindset personally.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I keep coming back to creativity, but like when I think of grit, I think of, hard work, scrappiness, and creativity, right? Because it's like the grit piece is being mentally tough and working really hard, but it's also figuring out how to get, over, around, or through obstacles. And the creativity piece, I think, is a fundamental component of the growth mindset too. So I think I would be very curious to see, like, if you were formalizing an assessment of somebody and determined they have a growth mindset, and then layering in a grit assessment, like what percentage of executives or leaders or even young folks that aren't quite yet at the pinnacles of their careers that we would identify as somebody with a growth mindset, we would also label as having real grit. I think it would probably be pretty high.
And also too, Kevin, like how does an individual react to failure, and like what happens next, right? And I think that from Dr. Dweck's book, a lot of the time that's what a lot of it comes from, especially in a lot of the earlier part of the book around a lot of the academic situations too, and when she's following the med students, the first year med students as well too, and like who is running into brick walls or challenges with those organic chemistry classes early on, and who's going out seeking that extra help, who's spending the extra time instead of just accepting the fact, like, all right, this is, I'm just going to do what I do to get by and just move on to the next thing, versus someone who's like, understanding this is their profession, their future. This is something that's the foundation of what they need to know going forward as well too. And they want to master something.
How do you build, Ken or Kevin or Vera? How do you continue to this day to build grit into your lives? You've already achieved a certain level of success. I often like to say that comfort is where everything, dreams, institutions, relationships, they all go to die once they get comfortable. And people do lose their grit. So what do you do, or what have you seen other people do to continue to build your grit muscle on a day-to-day basis, and then also amongst the teams that you're a part of? How do you do that?
My really quick response to that, because I know exactly what I think about kind of all the time, especially in the context of failure, is I always strive to make sure that failing does not impact my self-concept. And if I can keep it from, if you allow failure to impact in a negative way your self-concept, it will make you less confident and less resilient in the future, in my opinion. So I always am focused on making sure that, hey, if a pitch goes sideways or a deal you thought, were going to win, you don't end up winning, you don't let it get you down at a personal, kind of emotional level, because that could actually accumulate over time and then maybe erode at your grit.
Great. Vera, how about you? How do you continue to build your grit muscle for yourself, the team, and to growth? How do you do that?
Right. Well, again, I think that being extremely lucky to face situations and really transitions and transformation in life when you were like thrown in a completely different country and with a different language, different context. And I think that for me, the driver to move ahead with this project was the fact that the excitement of having this new challenge and to learn something new and to progress was always much more stronger than, let's say, this part of comfort that you are losing because you are just finding yourself in a country in a completely different context. And again, like, I'm not saying about just life experiences, but about professional experiences. So obviously when you have to manage these things in a work environment, you're also conscious that it's not only about yourself, because you have objectives, you have responsibilities, you have your peers. So at the end of the day, you want to reach the objective and you want to show the best of yourself. But at the same time, you understand that there are many risks because it's completely new. So I think that at early stages, like first time it happened to me maybe 10 years ago when I decided to change the country and actually move from Europe to emerging markets and really develop something new and completely different. So at that point of time, I think that my resilience and I would say reaction and the internal stress I was living with myself, it was obviously much stronger than what I'm living now and what I was living afterwards. So I think that the first experience is always painful. Failure is always painful, but at some point of time you realize that this time will be finalized, and believe it or not, you get out of there as a stronger person with a stronger muscle, and you actually enjoy your next step because you realize that it was this micro failure or maybe a big failure, but this is something that actually made you, or I wouldn't say, I don't know if it made you a better person or not, but at least you learned something new, and you really feel yourself a stronger person and a stronger professional. So then it happens naturally. Once you get used to it, to the rhythm, it happens naturally, and somehow maybe it's life, maybe it's yourself, but you are guided towards bigger challenges and bigger responsibilities.
So it's interesting to me that I see it all the time. People may have had be more willing to put themselves into difficult situations, learning situations early in their career, but as they continue to grow in their career, they retreat more and more to safety. And what I try to do is I try to put myself in situations as much as I can where I'm outclassed.
Can you say that again, Brian? Sorry, you're out what?
Where I'm outclassed. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I created a meeting with this private equity firm, 2 partners. We're talking about Oxford graduates, Stanford, and then they had all the minions on the phone at the same time, and all of them. So I'm putting myself in a situation that I created where I know there's a clicking or something in the background from someone where I'm outclassed. And I try to do that all the time for a number of reasons. I go into the meeting and preparing for it saying, Brian, you are outclassed. So that's a whole different mindset than I'm getting into it, which for me at least, it forces me to prepare better. Mm-hmm. It forces me to be in a situation where if I can create only 1 or 2 aha moments with people that I know more about a particular subject matter, or whatever the case is, I know that I'm outclassed. It's very uncomfortable. And it also forces me to, when you know you're outclassed, it forces you to ask more questions, open-ended questions, learn and talk less. So, and I don't need to put myself in situations anymore when I'm outclassed. I don't need to do it. But I do it as much as I can because that's where the learning lies, and that's where the excitement really, really is. So back to this, do you have any, throughout time, going back, we've all learned from teachers, leaders throughout time that we thought epitomized the growth mindset. And would anyone like to share someone, it could be a historical figure, it could be a teacher, it could be a business leader that you thought epitomized the growth mindset, because I may go follow them myself. Who would like to share the person that they thought really upholds the standard of growth mindset and share it with the rest of us if you'd like.
Still looking at some level. I can't think of, well, epitomizes is a very I don't know if I would say anybody that I've interacted with has epitomized, but I've seen it in different
historical figures, someone you'd follow throughout history that you think have epitomized the growth mindset.
I think the founder of Airbnb is a good example. And there's an interesting article. He does an interview with Andreessen Horowitz where he talks about the 10-star customer experience. And if you read that, I think you'll see what I mean. But that's one example I would point to.
And yeah, and I'm not going to claim to be any kind of NFL or football expert, but one player who I've always thought was pretty impressive and a student of the game from what I saw was Drew Brees, somebody who's had a lot of success and has stayed in the position and stayed in the league a very long time. And you always see pictures of him or his teammates taking posts and posting things on social media of like him being the last guy on the field at practice, him throwing the football at the uprights, like trying to hit the crossbar from different distances, like well after the rest of the team is gone, even though he's kind of like the superstar on the team and been there for years and probably knows the playbook better than anybody or wrote half of it himself too. So he's somebody who like, never settled and just also just an upstanding individual, a good person in the community that leverages that pedestal that he has and uses it for good as well too. And maybe a less controversial figure than like talking about Tom Brady or somebody like that.
And I'll throw up an easy one, which is Lincoln. So if you haven't read the book Team of Rivals, I recommend that you do. And we all know the story of Lincoln. Many of us know the story of Lincoln. He grew up in Illinois, which is where I live, and he was self-taught. And as he was moving through the state senate, would get in fights, and he was a brawler on the state senate floor. And then he turned himself into this incredible global statesman by having this growth mindset and this team of rivals concept, learning from others around him. And there are others throughout history as well. I'm a big fan of Napoleon. I'm reading Napoleon's another anthem on Napoleon right now. But it's that growth mindset that ultimately can change companies and change the world. And before we close, any other thoughts? There is a question coming in. You lead a search team. You lead one of our execution teams. And there are scientific assessments. We use assessments. The customers that we work with have sometimes their own proprietary assessments that look for a lot of different things, and not the least of which is some form of growth mindset. So your views on how into growth or how the world could and maybe should use assessments, scientific assessments to merit some of this out. And if anyone else wants to share, but Ken, you lead a search firm. How a search team, execution, your thoughts on assessment role to play in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, and I've taken them myself too for different positions and different, opportunities and roles too. And I mean, at least me personally, I've always found them very insightful, and it's scary at times of how accurate they may be. And I think again, it goes back to some of our earlier conversation, maybe around some of that standardized testing that I mentioned for grad school, not necessarily undergraduate, but like I think it is a very valuable tool and can be leveraged heavily as a point. And it doesn't have to be I don't think that should be the end all be all, but I do think when appropriate and when it, as frequently as possible, it should be used, because I think it can provide some, unfiltered elements to the search and the hiring process. I think we had a conversation, part of our conversation last week talked about, hiring and people you're familiar with versus people you don't know, right? People in your network versus someone outside of it as well too. And I think, this can provide some additional insight. Maybe somebody you're less familiar with, it'll give you a little bit more clear insight onto them. And then, somebody who you think is perfect and someone you've known for years, maybe this can be a tool that kind of makes you come back to the drawing board and question this decision as well too. So I think it very much should be a part of the process, but not the end all be all.
Is there a best test board? Is there a best test board there?
Sorry?
Is there a best assessment? Is there a best test for this?
I think it's hard to say what is best. Like obviously what Gordon mentioned, we have been using Big Five assessment, 10 to Growth, and together with Gordon, actually, I've been working to also integrate it as part of a holistic recruitment process. So obviously it is scientific. It is very important to understand maybe the key trait, the key personality traits of a candidate. But I agree with Ken that it shouldn't be a deal breaker. So for example, the idea to use assessment in the recruitment process after you have evaluated technical skills is basically to put kind of red lights on those competences which are critical for your client. But maybe the candidate, for some reason, he hasn't scored high on these competences. Now I'm talking about soft skills rather than hard skills. And then the way to use this assessment is obviously to get back to those points where you have the red light and complete it, through complementary assessments, through one-to-one interviews, but they definitely are very important in just understanding how to align, for example, corporate cultures of your clients with the set of values and soft skills of all your candidates. So it's definitely a way also to be objective and to quantify all those things which we normally write in client reports. So definitely a very good point.
Well, I'll say this: we have to. I think many of us have to go and do our interviews and do our jobs. I'll say this: what's fun about conversations like this, at least for me, and I hope others who are viewing and ourselves, is just by really asking the question: do I have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? There's growth in there as well. So for those of us who are watching on LinkedIn and other places, if you haven't read Carol Dweck's book, The Growth Mindset, it's certainly worth a read. And if you enjoyed it as much as I have, you may find yourself passing it out like candy, because just the question alone leads to a more open mindset. Listen, thanks for your time, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day. And to you in the audience as well. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.